Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. For those of you that like to get to the juicy story where you have the straightforward Bigfoot encounter, well, I've got that for you on this channel right now. But the full stories are really worth listening to, and I've got them listed at the bottom, because really, just the Bigfoot encounter without the whole experience from the beginning to the middle and the end is really worth listening to. But if you just want to get to the juicy encounter that people have sent in to me, by all means, here are a few examples of them right now on my channel. So get straight into the business, shall we? And let's get started. One day when my brother and I were very young, I think I was about 12 and my brother 11, we were sitting on our wooden deck at about 12 o'clock on a Saturday night. My parents had long since gone to bed, but we heard this horrible spectral-like wailing sound coming from the woods, and it was so eerily sinister that it sent horrifying shivers of foreboding trepidation down our spines. My brother was exceedingly reluctant to go out into the woods to investigate, because the noise had scared him half to death, and his eyes were quite literally as round as saucers, and he was physically shaking. I selfishly urged him to come with me into the woods with me, because in truth I was utterly terrified to go out on my own. I was torn between this insidious fear and this desperate, desirous urge to find out what indeed was actually going on in there. I was also predisposed to being far too inquisitive for my own good. I remember that night so very clearly because the energy in those woods was divergent and had taken on an incredibly menacing, inharmonious, almost evil ambience, and I was quite astounded to discover that the chorus of crickets, croaking frogs and animal calls had all but dissipated, and it was so quiet that you could quite literally have heard your own breathing before your face. "Please let's go back," my frenzied brother was urging me frantically. "Something feels very wrong in here." He was right, of course, but I was not going to agree with him because my curiosity was ruling my common sense, so I told him to stop being such a flake, and so begrudgingly he followed me deeper into the woods, and that was when we saw it. My brother and I just froze in utter incredulity because we saw what appeared to be an intelligent spiral of thick white smoke in the air that was twisting, winding, turning, and creating all kinds of weird, very peculiar shapes within the vapour. Suddenly within the smoke we saw this very clear vision of a huge, hideously ugly, contorted face that was staring at us through this mist. The only way that I can describe it is like the images that you sometimes actually see in the clouds. But the only differentiation was that this face was very real, with teacup-sized, luminescent green predatory eyes staring at us with a hungry intent. I really got the impression that this thing wanted our very soul. The funny thing was that try as we might to escape, my brother and I could literally not run away, because physically this smoky vapour appeared to somehow impair us, seemingly disabling us from being able to move. It was like we were being held down by an unseen, invisible force in a standing position, and this force was incredibly powerful. It was the most terrifying experience that I have ever encountered in my entire life, and I felt like a frozen statue that simply was incapacitated and could not move. Suddenly the smoky face opened its mouth to release a huge, harrowing, gut-wrenching wail, and then it released its hold on us, and it just spiraled away like a smoke from a chimney. As you can imagine, my brother and I were absolutely petrified, and we hightailed it out of the woods as fast as we possibly could, and it literally took us weeks before we ventured into the woods again. We never ever told our parents what we'd seen that night, because we couldn't even discern it ourselves, so what was the point? To this day we still will say, what the heck was that thing we saw all those years ago? And to date I have absolutely no answer to that baffling, curious question, and I probably never ever will. But I hope with all my heart I never encounter that insidious evil ever again. 1 week before my 18th birthday, my brother and I were hanging out in the woods to escape the heat of a sweltering hot summer's day, as the woods always provide us with some shady relief, and believe me, it can get hot in Nebraska. Suddenly we heard these tiny little cries that sounded exactly like little kittens in anguished distress. My brother and I looked for the source of these cries, but we found absolutely nothing. We decided to turn in for the day, when I discovered the most horrifying sight. We uncovered the dead body of a magnificent mountain lion in the prime of her young life, lying on the forest floor with all this green stuff coming out of her mouth. She was very definitely deceased. There was no evidence that the body had actually been mauled, harmed or attacked by a violent predator, but we could only assume that she had succumbed to some kind of dreadful poisoning. These creatures are so elusive, and yet there she was lying before us as clear as day, her body still warm to the touch, and I could see that her breast area was very enlarged, and I knew immediately that we had discovered a nursing mother whose little cubs lay forsaken and abandoned somewhere. My brother and I tried to search desperately for the deserted little cubs, but despite this fact, we heard their frantic calls. They somehow managed to elude us. We were pretty certain that those cubs were going to be eaten by predators, and it seemed so unbearably sad. But we knew that nature could be brutally cruel and savagely cutthroat, seemingly only pertaining to the survival of the fittest, as is usually always the way. It must have been about a whole week later. It was on the day of my 18th birthday, to be precise. My brother and I decided to go into the woods for a morning hike, because we always relished taking leisurely strolls in the woods, as we savoured in the tranquil, soothing serenity that we encountered there. On this particular occasion we had been walking for a long while, when we suddenly heard the familiar sound of a baby kitten crying, and my brother and I looked at each other agog. We were both thinking the same thing at the same time. It sounded like the calls that we had heard on the day that we found that dead mountain lion in the woods. Surely it was not possible for those little critters to have survived an entire week without suckling their mother's breast. My brother and I walked very quietly towards the source of the calls, moving furtively behind a large tree. Suddenly we saw her, and we could not believe what we were actually seeing. Could this really be true? I'm ashamed to say that my brother and I grew up as highly cynical, very sceptical, and exceptionally dismissive of the creature known as Bigfoot. We believed anyone who considered him to be remotely true was barking mad or completely cuckoo. So it was like being splashed with ice-cold water to see this curious creature sitting there larger than life before us, and a huge wake-up call for us. Yes, you've guessed it. We were staring at an awesome Bigfoot. I have heard people describe Bigfoots as ugly, hideous and grotesque before, but this magnificent creature was anything but, and the energy she exuded was gentle and loving. She was covered in gloriously soft, flowing golden hair, and had the most exquisite honey-brown eyes that were set in a long angular face. Her head was a cone shape that blended seamlessly onto a pair of very large shoulders. I did not know how tall she was, but sitting down, her torso appeared to be about 4.5 feet off the ground, so if she was standing up, she would have been a towering colossal giant, that was for sure. I noticed her sinewy muscles were very dense and ripped, and her upper body was about 4 foot wide. What we saw next was the rarest, unprecedented, gregarious thing that I've ever seen in my entire life. This very unselfish Bigfoot was a mother with a child all of her own, but she was nursing 2 mountain lion cubs, as if they were her very own, along with her own youngling. You would have easily perceived that Bigfoots and mountain lions were sworn enemies, so seeing such a curious anomaly was an outstanding miracle of nature, if ever I saw one. I could see by her expression that she was deliriously happy and full of immense joy, more than I have ever witnessed in an animal before. I could feel tears of awe welling up in my own eyes, and believe me, I never cry. But I was observing nature at her most generous, most bountiful and unselfish. The Bigfoot looked up in our direction to where I was standing, and I realized she knew my brother and I were watching her. So my head peered at her from behind the tree, and suddenly our eyes locked. In that moment there was a soulful connection between the two of us that touched the very depths of my soul. It was such a beautiful union of thought in that second that literally transformed my life in a vital moment. This dutiful mother continued to nurse the cubs while my brother and I watched in utter awe. We studied her for a long while, and she was not bothered by our attention or our presence. On the contrary, she embraced us happily,
like a spirited, prideful mother showing off her kids to admiring onlookers. And she looked at us with such a pleased, proud look on her face. It was like she really embraced motherhood with an exuberant, contented passion that could not be curtailed. When we told my mother about the phenomenal Bigfoot nursing those mountain lions in our woods, my mother believed us immediately, because she knew, as children, we were not predisposed to telling lies or making up spurious tales. My mother loves fussing over everything and everyone, so she bustled around the kitchen gathering all kinds of things together, like fruit such as peaches, grapes, potato chips and other snacks, and told me to take them immediately to the woods where we had actually seen the Bigfoot's nursing. She insisted to us that nursing mothers need lots and lots of energy, and emphasized this mother Bigfoot had 3 mouths to feed now and was reassuming another mother's responsibility, and so we would help her as much as we possibly could. So for about 6 months or so, we left the Bigfoot all kinds of edibles, and we discovered that she had a particular love of grapes, peaches and bananas, bacon and ham. We would leave the food for her in the forest because my mother insisted we must give her as much space as we possibly could, and we did that. So we actually did not get to see her for quite a long while, which really was rather sad. A year later, my mother and I witnessed the female Bigfoot on our lands with a mountain lion killing a 5-year-old male white-tailed deer, and they engaged in this hunt together like a formidable, inspiring, well-organised coalition. It was utterly extraordinary to watch, and even my mother, who saw her, was blown away by her beauty, magnificence, majesty, grace and elegance. She told me that she believed the mountain lion deemed that it was also a Bigfoot, as it was raised by such an outstanding, incredible mother. It appeared to have an awesome bond and a close affiliation with his adopted mother that had not been broken off by the cords of age, sex, or even species. Over the years, I have had numerous sightings of Mother Bigfoot and her sprog, whom is now a fully grown elephantine-sized Bigfoot male, accompanied by 2 healthy-looking mountain lions that are thriving on our land together, managing the exponential flourishing deer population. They have never been a problem, but truly are a bountiful blessing to our lives. We do sometimes leave Mother Bigfoot, who we now call Bertha, a selection of delicious fruit to enjoy, and she has gifted us with feathers, antlers, deer skins and pebbles that she leaves at our door. My mother and father are utterly protective over Bertha, so much so in fact that they've refused to almost let me share my story with you and your listeners without remaining anonymous for Bertha's protection, because we love her that much, almost as a family member, along with her 2 mountain lions that are also exceptionally discerning creatures, all thanks to being raised by a highly intelligent, discriminating, perceptive and judicious Bigfoot. My heart really does go out to people out there who've had challenging and terrifying encounters with Bigfoot, because I do believe, like humans, there are many different Bigfoot species out there, and some of them are possibly hateful, violent and aggressive, and I imagine could be potentially very dangerous to people and even scare them away from their homes for good. Let's not kid. I promise you these animals are powerful and strong and could easily lift a car without even breaking a sweat. I would say Bertha's little one is now 8 foot tall and 700 pounds, so he's a hefty specimen, I promise you. We never got to see Bertha's own partner, but I have this gut feeling that he is now deceased. I don't know what happened to him. If Bertha was aggressive and violent, I assure you she would be highly dangerous and tear you limb from limb in a heartbeat if she wanted to. But Bertha is an exceptional Bigfoot with a heart of absolute...
So there we are. That's the juicy bits of our stories tonight. I personally think you should go back and listen to the whole story because it makes it so much more exciting, because then you learn all about where it happened, the location, and all about the fabulous characters involved in the story, and that makes the story so much more gripping. But as I say, so go down to the description and then click on to the YouTube link, and then you will hear the whole story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.